Welcome to episode 18 of the AFA Gen X podcast. My name is Ashley Mahadia, National Chair of the Gen X Community of Practice and your host for this episode. A big thank you to the AFA for allowing us to host this podcast and to our supporting partner, Advice Intelligence, for powering this episode. Last week, the government released draft legislation that, when legislated, will enact the Experienced Advisor Pathway. The proposal seeks to equate the worth of a degree with 10 plus years of experience in the industry. Under the proposed measure, an advisor would be deemed to have met the education requirements if they have 10 years experience providing advice between the 1st of Jan 2007 and the 31st of December 2021, and have not recorded any disciplinary action on the Financial Advisors Register before the 31st of December 2021. In this episode, we speak to Phil Anderson, CEO of the AFA, who sheds more light on the Experienced Advisor Pathway. Phil, thank you for your time again and welcome to episode 18 of the AFA Gen X podcast.
Thanks, Ash, and it's great to be here again.
First, I'd like to congratulate you on a very successful campaign. No doubt it has led to the great outcome that we all saw with the yes vote at a resounding 96%. Phil, what is your state of mind after this great outcome?
Oh, Ash, good question about state of mind. I think from me personally, I'm really excited about the future of the FAAA. And whilst you talk about the great result that we've got so far, that was the result to make this merger happen. But the real proof of the success of the merger will be how many AFA members agree to come across to the new association, and equally how many of the former FPA members agree to renew this year. So we've got some really big targets still in front of us. And I think one of the things that has struck me out of this is the huge amount of work that's involved in any merger. Only a small fraction of it might be visible to anyone other than those who are integrally involved in it. I still fully appreciate the huge amount of work that's left for us, getting the members to go across, all the branding work that needs to take place, making sure that the communities come together and function effectively, and everyone feels that they have a home to belong to. From me personally, from the merger, I'm absolutely focused on in now two areas. So I'm the general manager transformation. So I'm responsible for the transition. So all of these things that have to happen, but I'm also the interim general manager of policy and advocacy for the FAAA. So there's a huge workload with that. And obviously right at the moment with the education standard, and also everything that has to happen with a quality advice review outcome. So look, really excited about the merger and the value of doing this. The process still has a little way to play out until the 1st of July when we really fully come together because the AFA members come across. But that's keeping us very busy, but we fully see the value of what we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you. So today we're here to talk about the Experienced Advisor Pathway. What are the key points of the advisor of that advisor pathway?
Okay, look, the actual draft legislation, there are three key elements to it. One, of course, is a really big element that we're all really focused on. That's the Experienced Advisor Pathway. But there are two other parts to this draft bill. One is to provide greater flexibility for new entrants where there might be minor issues with their qualification and getting it approved by ASIC. And that's a really important outcome. And we're really appreciative of the government for delivering that, because a number of people have been held up for minor reasons, whether it's a change of course code or slight difference in what they did versus what the approved course contains. And then the third element is a change with respect to qualified tax relevant providers and the automatic approval of tax agents who were unfortunately excluded from the outcome that was delivered in late 2021. So there are three elements, but of course we are really focused on that one about the experienced advisor pathway. And what this is an option for advisors to continue to practice should they meet the requirement of having completed 10 years full-time equivalent practice between the 1st of January 2007 and the 31st of December 2021. So it's 10 years full-time experience in that 15-year period. They're also required to meet a requirement that they have a clean track record. And this is being assessed in terms of whether there are any bannings by ASIC or disqualifications by ASIC or enforceable undertakings at any time up to the end of December 2021. So that's really the core elements of this. There's all the detail that we have now in front of us, and we have the opportunity to respond to the government about this, about how it works. But we're really pleased that the government has put this out there, and we do now have something to talk about. And I will come back and reflect on later the fact that there are some things that we asked for that we haven't got, but at least we are now talking about what the government has recommended.
And Phil, what has been the AFA's contribution in that first version, that first draft that we saw?
So it's a really good question, because this whole education debate has actually been going on now for a good 10 years. It was back in the FOFA times that the ideas first started to emerge about raising education standards, and ASIC put a proposal paper out there back in, I think, 2012 about introducing a degree requirement. It wasn't until we had further reports like there was a financial system inquiry in late 2014 and the Parliamentary Joint Committee, all of whom recommended that there would be a degree requirement for advisors. The primary focus there was new entrants, but of course there was going to be some increase in education standard that was required for existing advisors. We went through the whole FASEA process, and I think all of us probably felt uncomfortable about the lack of recognition for prior learning and experience, and maybe there's also many of us who might have questioned why FASEA decided that it needed to be a graduate diploma, an 8-subject graduate diploma, rather than a 4-subject graduate certificate. But that's where they landed. We also continued to push back on the issue of lack of recognition of prior learning and experience. It was fairly restricted in what was being recognised. So there was no recognition of CPD, and that was specifically referred to in the explanatory memorandum. And it's something that we continued to push for. So we have long argued for better recognition of prior learning and experience, and that could be through recognition of subjects for time in experience. And we have certainly put forward proposals over the years. So we have been a strong advocate of better recognition of prior learning experience, including CPD, for a long time. Now, this process really heated up in December of 2021, where we first saw Stephen Jones come out with a proposal around the experienced advisor pathway. A week later, the government, the former government at that time, released a consultation paper. where there were two parts to this. One was what they were proposing for experienced advisors, and then greater flexibility for new advisors. There was a consultation process there. At that stage, what the government had proposed, or the former government, was that the qualification would be someone who had 10 years out of the last 12 years experience as at the 1st of January 2026. So it was a much later date. But it was over a shorter period of time. So that was a key part of it. They also talked about, at that stage, a clean track record, but the requirement to complete the ethics unit. We then go forward to August of last year, when the current government released their proposal. Now, that proposal was with respect to completion of 10 years full-time experience over a 15-year period, but assessed as at 1 January 2019. And the consultation was around a much broader concept of what a good track record might actually involve. Now, what we've seen is that it has been moved back. So it's now the 1st of January 2021. That's the 31st of December 2021. That is the cutoff date. So it's 15 years prior to that. So we have, through our advocacy and others, seen that cutoff date move from the 1st of January 2019 to the 31st of December 2021. The other thing that I think we've seen as a result of advocacy across many groups was greater certainty around what a clean track record meant. We were very conscious that we didn't want to see minor breaches that might have been the subject of disciplinary action by the Financial Services and Credit Panel mean that someone who had put all their focus into this pathway suddenly found themselves ineligible for it in 2025 or 2024, when it might be too late for them to consider the education pathway. So, look, in terms of what we would say we contributed to on this, I would highlight the fact that continuous ongoing advocacy for greater recognition of prior learning and experience, particularly for older and more experienced advisors, pushing the date back, the start date back from the August 22 consultation of 1 January 2019 to 31 December 2021, and then also greater certainty around what a clean track record might look like.
And Phil, are we able to quantify how many advisors will be able to stay in the industry via the experienced advisor pathway?
Well, we don't have any clear data on this. That's where people are up to in their education journey is not public data, and we need to be conscious that people who had further study to do, they had a choice to start it or not. So whether they started it or not, we don't actually know at this point. I'm estimating that we're probably talking about 2,000 to 3,000 people at least, for whom this will be a critical outcome in their decision to stay in the financial advice profession. I think that that's probably broadly the number that we're talking about, but we just really don't know for sure. The FAAA is about to kick off a member survey, and in that we will be able to obtain some really useful data to put some more numbers around how much this would involve. But I think it is a really important development, because it will help to hold on to many of those really experienced quality advisors that we want to stay in the advice profession.
We often hear advisors who have a university degree or more, and of course that have passed FASEA, complain that we might be going backwards with this. Do you think that 10 years worth of experience equal to a university degree?
I don't think they are directly comparable. But I think so we wouldn't necessarily make the call that they are equivalent. Now, the actual legislation, original legislation, did talk about having done an undergraduate degree or higher or equivalent. And so the question is, what does equivalent actually mean? I think education and experience are not the same thing. I think education's important. I think having good education doesn't mean you'll be a good advisor, and equally, having a lot of experience also doesn't mean that you will be a good advisor. But I think 10 years good experience is very important, and it's very valuable. Now, I'm talking about there are things that you get from experience that you don't necessarily get from education. And that's the people skills that advisors are known for, their great capacity to work with clients, to flush out what really motivates them, what really concerns them, what their needs are. That's not stuff that you necessarily learn at university. And I also think experience um, teaches advisors how to sell. Now, I know, we're not supposed to use that word sell anymore, but we shouldn't leave out the practical reality that getting a client to implement the advice takes selling skills. You're not selling products, you're selling the client taking the action and implementing the financial plan that they've been given, or to take up the insurance that you have recommended. So selling skills are important, and they are things that you don't get from having completed a university degree. So I don't think it's in responding to your question, I don't think it's as simple as saying 10 years of experience is equivalent to a degree, but experience is really important, and we do need to value experience, and that is what we're getting with this experienced advisor pathway.
Thank you. The next question has two parts to it. Can you first explain the self-declaration piece coming with that new legislation? And then I want you to maybe touch on whether there might be ways to misuse the advisor experience pathway.
Yeah. So your advisors are going to need to make a declaration that they qualify. And then their licensee will be required to provide that declaration to ASIC. So both the advisors and the licensee have skin in the game on this. Now, the declaration will need to, as we understand it, address the fact that they meet the 10 years full-time equivalent qualification criteria, and that they also meet that clean track record. Now, I'm not particularly concerned about the clean track record because I think that's an objective exercise. ASIC has a banned and disqualified register. They have an enforceable undertakings register. So this is going to be black and white in terms of whether someone meets it or not. And that, given that ASIC has that data, we can expect that ASIC would take action against someone who claims they have a clean track record if they don't. Let's not lose focus of the fact that very recently we've seen media coverage about someone who claimed to have passed the exam who hadn't. So those things will be picked up. The bit that is potentially more challenging is with respect to the 10 years full-time equivalent experience in that 15-year period. Now, I'm not particularly worried about it so much for people who've been authorised representatives for that entire time, because there's an authorised rep register that goes back to the start of the FSRA days in 2003 or thereabouts. The financial advisor register only started in 2015, in March of 2015. So who's been left out of an official register is people who were representatives. That's people who were salaried advisors. They were employees or directors of an advice business who were providing advice. They were authorised by, well, that they were permitted to provide advice by their licensee, but they weren't authorised reps. They were salaried advisors. So there is no register of those people. So we're going to have complications about people who spent time as a salaried advisor because that data doesn't sit on a register. The other thing that we're going to have potential issue with is people who worked part-time for a period. So the assessment of whether someone meets that 10-year full-time equivalent requirement is going to need to be done very carefully. And there is some risk of it being misrepresented. But look, I would think that there should be enough controls around it. There are people who know these people who will be able to comment on whether they meet that requirement, and we shouldn't, I guess, dismiss Standard 12 of the FASEA Code of Ethics that places an obligation on advisors to make sure that their colleagues are doing the right thing. So, yeah, Ash, there is a risk, and I think it comes down to people who are unable to prove it through public registers. So I'm talking about people who have been representatives, and also that issue about if you've spent time as a part-time advisor, how it all consolidates up to prove that you have those 10 years full-time equivalent advising experience.
And what role do you think licenses have to play to ensure that we use the experienced advisor pathway to help stop the exodus of advisors? We've lost, I think, over 10,000 advisors now. How do we keep those advisors?
Yeah, so Ash, I think the licensees are an integral part of this, and the draft legislation requires them to make those declarations. I think they will do the right thing there. They will need to be part of the process, and when they do assess this for one of their advisors, and there'll be 2 points at which they'll need to make this assessment. One is for once the legislation's passed, any new advisor that's appointed, they will need to make this assessment. And then equally for those who are ongoing, there'll need to be an assessment that's made in the 30 business days after the 1st of January 2026. But they will have to sit down and carefully work out whether the advisor has met that 10 years full-time equivalent experience. They'll need to do the calculations and they'll need to make sure that they get it right. I imagine that there will be some people who will be really borderline. It might be 10.1 years of full-time equivalent or 9.9 years of full-time equivalence. What I think is really important is that advisors very early on know where they stand, because we wouldn't want people to get to the end of 2025 only to discover that when their licensee does the analysis, they're not actually across the line at 10 years. They're somewhat short of the line. So, look, I think licensees will play a role in supporting this solution, and they will make it happen. I don't think that there's going to be complications. But Ash, can I just take a step back? I think there's an important point to explain about where the positioning that the profession has taken around the experienced advisor pathway. That when we responded to the government in September of last year, we made some really important recommendations. We made it very clear that we support increased recognition of prior learning and experience, and we also supported the experienced advisor pathway. But we suggested that it should apply to advisors who are older, mature, experienced advisors, and not to really young advisors who managed to pass that criteria. So we made the recommendation in our submission that there should be a 10-year sunset clause. And that meant that people who operated under this exemption would have a period of 10 years to do it. We also said that they should meet a requirement to complete the Code of Ethics subject. Now, in recommending that, we also at that time suggested that advisors should also have the opportunity to pursue the education pathway, but with better recognition for their prior learning and experience. So that, for example, we've recommended this many times in the past, 15 years of experience should be worth 3 subjects. 10 years of experience should be worth 2 subjects. So that when that was worked out and taking into account having completed the ADFP and maybe a professional designation, that the amount that was left over to do was much less. And that would mean that advisors could have made a genuine choice. They could choose to take the experienced advisor pathway for a 10-year period, or they could do some further study, but more moderate amount of further study to then be able to continue for as long as they wanted. So that's the way that we've framed this in the past. We do realise that this is a hotly debated issue. And when we've done surveys in the past, we've found that half of our members are strong supporters and half of our members are strongly opposed. Now, what we've sought to do is find a position that we think takes into account the arguments of both sides. So the arguments against are that this will undermine the recognition of financial advice as a profession by, say, for example, allowing someone who's a 35-year-old advisor with 10 years experience to continue to practice without doing further study for another 30 or 35 years. And so the arguments against that is that delays when financial advice would be recognised as a universal profession. So I think that is really important, is that we have some consistency. The other thing that we get a lot of pushback from members on is, well, I got started early on this, and I have invested in doing that further study. It's cost me money. It's cost me time. Why is it that now the rules are changed and people don't have to do it? So we've sought to find what we think is a balancing point where people do have options, but it's not open-ended in terms of being able to leverage that experienced advisor pathway. Now, we're not going to keep everyone happy. In fact, we're probably going to be certain that there will be a lot of people who are unhappy with what we recommend. But we are motivated by making sure that there is a solution available to everyone, and that we do hold on to as many of the good experienced advisors who might be at risk of leaving if this isn't available.
Yeah, amazing insights as usual. Thanks again for your time today. We hope that you've enjoyed episode 18 of the AFA GenNext podcast. Thanks again to the AFA and Advice Intelligence, and to Phil Anderson for his massive contribution. See you soon.